Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Stephen Keech, who is the vocalist of the band Haste the Day, originally out of Indiana. Now Stephen's out of Nashville. We talk all about the band's brand new record, Dissenter, which just came out on May 1st. This is the return album for this band in quite some time. We talk about why that is. We talk about their reunion after several years at Furnace Fest in 2023. We talk about why the band decided to come back, how they're doing things on their own terms, and what sort of influenced them to not just, put out a song or get back on the road when they wanted to for some reunion stuff, but to actually go full tilt and put out this record. It's an absolutely fantastic concept record. We get deep into the concept. We also get into the real world influences that we talk about, including the song with the song Liminal, which features Garrett Russell of Silent Planet, who's a former guest of this show. We talk all about sort of Stephen's perspective as someone that approaches things from a place of faith in Christianity and how he views that the evangelical movement is missing the mark of what the teachings of God and Jesus and Christianity in general really mean, and how it really falls short and is very negatively impactful to society when it should be positive. We talk a lot about that, which is, right up my alley to talk about a lot of these things. And all in all, it was just great to talk to Stephen. I've listened to this band, I told him, for over 20 years. I've been listening to them since I think I was like 13 or 14 years old. So it was absolutely fantastic to be able to break this down, kind of break down the band's career in general, and kind of pick Stephen's brain, not just when it comes to lyrics and kind of the vocal aspect, but kind of his influences from a cinematic perspective, as he's been doing a lot of production and mixing when it comes to scores and things of that nature over the past several years. So it's really great to talk to Stephen. I really appreciate that he took the time out of their busy schedule of kind of the rollout of this album to break this one down with me, and I hope you all really enjoy it. If you want to follow the podcast or support the podcast, you can just find everything at The Powerless Pod. All socials are at The Powerless Pod. You can email me at thepowerlesspod@gmail.com if you want to be on the show, as well as DM me on any of those social media platforms that you typically use. You can probably find me there. I'm even on some random ones that I kind of forget that I have. So feel free to message there, and I will get back to you if you want to be on the show, whether you're into journalism, activism. I've talked to people about the books that they've written. I've talked to people about their pieces involving foreign policy, involving domestic policy. Talked to political commentators. I've, of course, mostly talked to musicians, and at times kind of mix both of those things together if they had politically charged lyrics, as we sort of do here with Stephen in this a bit as well. So if any of those things are kind of your interest or what you do, please feel free to reach out to me. It'd be absolutely fantastic to have you on the show. This upcoming week, I'm recording a couple of pretty cool episodes, but I do want to also make sure to get back to more regularly interviewing bands, as well as I continue to do kind of political activism and interviewing journalists and authors and things of that nature. So again, reach out at all those places. All those will be in the show notes below, as well as access to all of Haste the Day's stuff, including their new album, Dissenter, which again, we break down on this. And I'll leave it at that. So here's my conversation with Stephen Keech of Haste the Day on the Powerless Podcast. All right, I'm here for the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. Stephen Keech, who's the vocalist and frontman of the metalcore band Haste the Day, originating out of Carmel, Indiana. You sent me Central Time, so is it still fair to say you're still seated in Indiana as well?
No, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay, I wondered that when you said that. I live in Illinois, so I'm with the same time zone, and when I saw that, it's like he's either there or Nashville. That's you're either where you're from or you're in Nashville, because that's where everybody's at nowadays, right?
I think that's accurate.
Yeah. Well, regardless, happy to have you on. I've been listening to your band now for, I don't know if this is a compliment or not when somebody says this to you at this point, but for 2 decades.
That's amazing.
I used to, I give this backstory to a few people. I grew up in a pretty religious household, in a Free Methodist household, and I worked at a church camp in the summertime. And at that church camp, you were only allowed to listen to Christian music, and specifically like they kind of put the line at, because that can be kind of ambiguous, as in the scene, that it could be found at like the Christian family bookstore. Like if the person could look it up, didn't know who it was. So that's why I got really into you all, and later on Devil Wears Prada, and everyone kind of from like the Christian influenced metalcore, which ended up being some of the most formative bands at large in the scene at that time anyway. So it was really cool to kind of made me like whittle down what I was listening to all summer, and would just like listen to your records and a few other bands just over and over and over again. So I'm absolutely ecstatic to have you on today, to not just talk about that, but to primarily talk about your upcoming record, Dissenter, which comes out on May 1st via Solid State Records. I do know that this is your first record since 2015, which was Coward. So kind of to kick things off, first and foremost, before we get to the album, I know in 2023, that's when the band did the big reunion over at Furnace Fest. What was it because Furnace Fest is so iconic and you guys just decided, it made sense for you to kind of come back? What was kind of the Kickstarter for the band to come back with mostly the iteration you guys are now at that time after so long?
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where we had been asked so many times to like come back and play a festival or whatever, and most of us had just kind of moved on. We had families, we had jobs, we had things we were doing, so we weren't really looking to get back together necessarily. And then finally, Furnace Fest made us an offer that we just couldn't refuse.
That'll do it. Yeah.
And the fact that it was like, okay, well, if people truly do want to see us again, like, who am I to deny my son the ability to see our band? Like,
right.
That's so cool. Like, such a cool concept. And so we talked about it. It was hard. We had to do a lot of convincing and cajoling to get everybody on board, but we got there. And as soon as we stepped foot on stage at Furnace Fest in 2023, we were blown away. We were like, this is such a gift to be able to do this so many years later, and especially like when the band broke up back in 2011, we truly thought we were done. Like, we're like, well, nobody's coming to shows really anymore. Like, it just started kind of dying out. Our record sales were like, gone pretty much. But I mean, that was kind of across the board. Like,
right.
And the music industry was changing so rapidly. Streaming was starting to become way more prevalent. You couldn't gauge success by record sales anymore. Even though every record that we did after Press the Hinges was like way lower and then way lower again and then way lower again. And people just weren't interested in metalcore anymore. That's what it felt like. And then there was definitely a resurgence that has happened since the pandemic. Or maybe a little bit before that, and gave us the ability to come back, and we're very grateful.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a couple of things. I think it had to have been weird coming from when you guys did, really getting prolific in the early 2000s. What a hell of a time for that to happen, because like things became so disjointed in the music industry. Now, at the very least, there's almost like too many numbers that you can follow to try to like break your brain on what's doing well and what isn't. So that's a different sort of problem. But in the 2000s, like, if you're signed to a record label, the record labels had no idea how to gauge if you were doing well or not. You didn't know how to gauge if how well you're doing or not. Like, different markets for different reasons wouldn't be doing well, depending upon the situation with like how everyone's doing financially in the country or at large, like as things to do, like so many different factors were going on in a really chaotic time that it would have felt like, I don't know, like it would have just like messed with my head so much. So I can only empathize with that. So it is cool that you guys got to come back 2023, and what a festival to come back to. I think that's the right way to do it, is something like Furnace Fest, one of the most iconic ones in the entire country. When it came from there, what propelled the band to not just return to playing shows or doing some reunion stuff, giving fans kind of that treatment of you guys coming back and playing some of their favorite songs, but to work on new material? Because I think it was around like within the next year in 2024, maybe, is when you guys had announced that you were working on new material and then released your first single, Back Burn. What was kind of the approach? Because that's very different from, say, coming back and doing some shows when you want to, or kind of doing that kind of reunion type stuff. What brought you to that next level of wanting to get back fully and writing music for Haste of the Day?
Yeah, we just wanted to leave the book open and see what happened. And it was around that time in Furnace Fest. We just loved being in a room together and playing music again together. So it was like, we never really truly explored what it would look like to carry on from Attack the Wolf King, like what comes next. I mean, we did do Coward, which I'm super proud of that record, but it was not necessarily a continuation from what we did with Wolf King.
Right.
And we were all really proud of that record. And one of the things that like struck us when we got back together, or when we played Furnace Fest, and I think we did like a total of 7 shows that year. And it blew our minds how many people came up and said that Attack of the Wolf King was their favorite record. Like we were like, wait, people actually like that record? Like I thought that we love that record. We are very proud of that record. And there was something very special about the time that we spent writing that. And but we just kind of thought that like, well, I guess that was for us, not really for everybody else. And, I guess we don't get the chance to really explore what comes after that. And so we wanted to see what's next after that. How does Attack of the Wolf King mature by 13 years or whatever it was. And so we started writing, and me and Scotty started sending stuff back and forth to each other and sending it to the guys and getting input, and we kind of stumbled on the sound that we wanted to have, which was a blend of very heavy with also melodic, catchy choruses and emotional overtones. And it really kind of came together, and we were like, okay, yeah, let's do an album. Of course, it started out like maybe we do a couple of EPs, whatever.
Right.
But it's like, well, no, let's just do an album. Like, we like making albums. Let's make one.
Yeah, and it's what you had done so prolifically within the height of your career initially. So why not get back to form, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
I know that several of you had gone and done other things with different, obviously with As Cities Burn. Your drummer, if my memory serves me right, has been drumming with The Devil Wears Prada as well. So with both like the time difference as well as kind of being a part of these other projects, playing different roles in those projects than you have in Haste the Day, and coming back together, did it feel like, I mean, this is always kind of like a convoluted question, because I think most people, you sit down with the people you want to write music and you got to see what works. But like, did you find coming back that there was any sort of different angles you came to it with, kind of coming to things with a more seasoned perspective, being in other projects, and just kind of speak to the contrasts and comparisons from when you wrote music prior to now as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think literally every person has like came back to the band with new experience and a new outlook of making music. Like Scotty's been in several different like shoegaze projects, and Brennan has done a lot with church music and stuff like that. Like he's been pastoring and stuff, so he's got like a different outlook on a lot of things. Like everyone has come to the table with something a little different than what we had before, and I've been doing like film music, so I had this very, like, my musical style is a lot more cinematic these days, and and I really wanted to blend some of that into this record. And yeah, so definitely we all had a more mature, more seasoned outlook as we kind of started writing this record. And I think that it really plays into how this record turned out and the overall tones of it. And I'm sorry,
but to that point, it's interesting you said you've kind of worked on movie score type music. That was one of the first notes I had when I listened through the record the first time, is there's a lot of cinematic elements to this, which I'm a big fan of, when a record kind of feels like its own movie score, right? Especially when you've got the lyrical concepts you do in this record that make it feel that way even more. That was one note I had from the differences of your other records. It definitely feels like a continuation, but the main thing I noticed was kind of that film scorey type vibe, which then it makes sense that one of you, as you just put, that you have that influence. I think nowadays too, with how production is in general in the metalcore scene at large, that's something people have gone for more and more, that I think is like a very, very positive development for the sound of the genre, because it just lets you explore dynamics in a way that you couldn't with just, I mean, you could do great things with ethereal effects on a guitar and some tappy leads and some, soundscapey type stuff. But when you can full tilt bring in some production from that angle, it adds so much to the emotion, I think, of the music, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it goes together very well. And the records that I've been drawn to in the past feel cinematic to me. They feel like I was a big fan of Zao, growing up and getting into this genre. And they're records they felt like I was watching a story unfold. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and that was something that I always wanted to pursue. Honestly, it was the vision for Attack of the Wolf King, and we could only do so much because, you have a month like to record a whole album, and it's like we had a month to write it. Part of that was on the road, and then we had a month to record it. And you just don't really have time to really make the kinds of decisions that we were able to make on this record. This record took us 2 years to make, and we were able to like take our time. We were able to come up with new ideas while we're just listening to the songs in our car and like going about our daily tasks. And it's like, well, obviously we need to have a choir there. Like, let's find a choir. Let's put it in there. And we did. And, the outro to Oblivion has strings in it. And we were like, I've got string player friends. Like, I know how to write for strings. So let's go. So, we wrote this beautiful outro part, and I had some friends of mine play it, and it's stuff that we would have never been able to do in previous records because we just didn't have the time or the budget, really. I mean, like this one we were like producing ourselves, so we could do whatever we want. Again, like, let's go, let's just do it.
Yeah, and that's a kind of a cool element to this, I'm sure, for you guys now that you've said in press statements and stuff that you're very much doing this when you want, kind of how you want, and kind of taking that approach rather than getting burned out, or as you said, being rushed to get through a record, which there's sometimes like, you hear from different people, being rushed sometimes pull something out of you that maybe otherwise you wouldn't have if you're, writing at the 11th hour, recording at the 11th hour. You get kind of some special magic there too. But
Sure.
As someone that doesn't like to be pressed, I could totally empathize with being able to just like nitpick and do what you want and not have that added pressure of like time constraints now, as opposed to when you're on the road all the time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And you referenced that you guys produced this record yourself. I had seen again from your press release that you had, at least it stated that you had taken on much more of the producer role on this. Was that something you had done in the past much more? And if you hadn't, what were kind of your thoughts as you were going through this record, not just from the writing and recording aspect, but also production on your end?
Yeah, it just made the most sense because, I mean, that's what I've been doing, whether it's producing, film scores, commercial scores, or whatever, or producing bands. Like I've been doing that basically like since a few years after the band broke up, like maybe around 2013 or something. And that's my instrument. It's like, yes, I do scream in the band, but like my instrument is production. My instrument is, the whole song, and being able to be in control of that, or at the very least, like be in the driver's seat, and being able to hear everybody's opinions and kind of, help make them a reality is just kind of the obvious road to take. Because also, I mean, again, it's like I can do it on my own time, for very little money or none, basically. And, we don't have to pay a producer. We don't have to, book studio time. We did this record in a very we all live in different states. Like everybody lives in a different state. We've got 2 members in Indiana still, but everybody else is in a different state. And so we had to be very flexible with everybody's time. We had to be very flexible with okay, Scotty is going to record his guitars at home and he's going to send me the tracks and I'm going to edit them and put them all into the whatever, and we're going to fly Giuseppe out for these 3 days and knock out all the drums and that'll be that, it had to be very flexible. And so it was just kind of an easy choice, okay, well, I'll just do it,
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that you've been doing this with other bands and for scores and everything in between certainly makes that an easier role to step into this time around with the record, right? Do you find it's kind of hard though? Like I always ask this with people that self-produce records, because sometimes it's good to have or people perceive it as it's good to have somebody that's separated from the project to kind of be that outside person that's sort of with the band for the recording process, can kind of give the input of like, actually, you're wrong, you're too stuck on this riff, this is why this sounds better, etc. Do you find it's more difficult to separate yourself from your band's own music when you're doing that producer role than some of the other projects that you work on, or is it pretty easy for you to do at this point with how seasoned you are with the producer role?
When it comes to the music, it's pretty easy. When it comes to the vocals, that's where it gets more difficult. And
yeah,
I definitely had to fly Dave out at some point. I was like, you need to just be in the room while I'm doing this. It was definitely a journey getting to the vocal sound that we got, because I hated everything for like a year. I could not make a sound in a microphone without hating it. And it was really difficult because, I mean, of course, I'm my own worst critic when it comes to especially vocals. I've never particularly loved the sound of my voice, or I've always wanted to sound like somebody else or whatever. I think that's pretty true for most vocalists. And having, Dave in the studio and actually just being like, dude, that sounded sick. Like, it did? Okay, cool. Let's go. Like, then it gave me the confidence to do the next take. And it completely changed the way the vocals sounded. And so, yeah, very difficult when it comes to producing my own vocals. The music, I think I've done enough tracks. Like, I used to work at a licensing company, and it was just 8 tracks a month. That's what I did. It's just, so you kind of learn to be able to kill your darlings, like,
Right.
so to speak. Like, you don't get too attached to anything necessarily. And I mean, there was even like a track that I like cut the chorus on. Like, I suggested it to the guys. I was like, hey, and I wrote it. I mean, and I was like, this section, I think it needs to go. Let's delete it. Like, and I was like, I sent them a version of it without it, and I was like, okay, well, let's go. That's it. So yeah.
I love that though, because I always wonder that, because I think some people, the instinct might be to hear somebody self-producing and think that you might like give yourself a little bit more liberty, but that's not the case. Any artist knows that you hate your own stuff way more than anybody else's, so that makes a lot of sense. I totally get that. I'm just kind of curious too, because I do production and stuff. Maybe for the listeners, there'll be 3 music nerds that are into this, or maybe everybody will like it. But when you do kind of production on let's go with your own record here, since that's what we're talking about. Are you a big hardware type person? Are you plugins galore? Like, kind of what are some of your go-to things that you utilize for this record on the production angle? We could go with your voice, or how you kind of tackled some of the instruments, or whatever, just some highlights there.
Yeah, I mean, I have never been like a super gearhead, mostly because I choose not to afford it. I've got a family to feed. I don't need like a vintage Neve,
Right.
But I use an Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo, and the plugins are just so great. Like, right now, like, you're hearing a Neve 1073, with my voice, and an 1176 Blue Stripe. Like, that's my vocal chain, and it's all in the box technically.
Yeah.
But it sounds great, and I can't tell a difference. I've worked in, amazing studios. I recorded a record once in RCA Studio, RCA Studio A. It was Ben Folds' studio at the time, and it had this unbelievable vintage API console, and had all these like incredible microphones, incredible things. And one thing, the lesson that I learned that was so hard to learn, was I was expecting to pull up these tracks in my studio when I got back and think, oh, they're going to sound insane. They're going to sound unbelievable. And you know what they sounded like? They sounded like a record that I recorded.
Yeah,
like
right.
It sounded like what I would do. I was limited by my own ability, and for good or bad. It sounded like my production style, and it wasn't disappointing. It was kind of freeing, where I was like, as long as the gear is like good, like I've got good converters, I've got good speakers that I'm listening on, a somewhat treated room, I can make it sound good. I can make it at least sound the way that I want it to sound. And yeah, so I'm not super into like crazy into gear. The other like big role that gear played in this record is, again, we didn't, we recorded it over 2 years, so you can't just mic an amp and leave it set up. Like, we just couldn't afford to do that. Like, and also I'm recording in my house where, I like my family, my kids' bedrooms are like right behind me. Scotty is doing the same thing, and an amp is completely impractical. So we were heavily using Quad Cortex for everything. That way we could keep all the tones the same. And then also STL Amp Hub was like huge for us too, because it was just like I blended those two things together. And it just made such a huge guitar tone. Like Scotty's guitar tones are all really killer already. And then add a little bit of that STL amp hub in there for some low end and top end. And it just like made those guitars just punch, and it was great. And to be able to pull it up and it's the same every time and I never have to fuss with microphones was awesome.
Yeah, those quad Cortexes especially, like one day I'll have one of those things, because just everyone that uses it, it's like, you know, some of my friends that have been in touring bands for years that are like very like, you know, what I would call like former gear purists, you know, I'll never go to like an amp modeler, I'll never go to this or that. It's like, no, it sounds, I'm, you know, some audiophile guy will get mad at me for saying this, but to everybody else, it sounds exactly the same as what you're trying to really do. And you're not lugging around a 100-pound amp to do it, let alone having it set up as you just said. And with the gear thing too, it's like, you know, to that point, like the two mics we're using right now, SM7B, is like, you'll go to a studio, use some boutique mic that costs an obscene amount of money, and then you'll do the same tracking with an SM7B, and you know what? A lot of time you'll end up liking the SM7B more, right? So yeah, the working man's production is oftentimes just as great sounding as like a massive room. It's more of what you're able to do, the performances, and what you can tweak with it, right?
Yeah.
And thanks for breaking that down. I always like to kind of dive into those things when I can with somebody that kind of knows those ins and outs on the production angle. But to break down the record conceptually, from the notes I was able to see from your press release, again, it appears from what you were saying, and I could feel this from it as I was talking about with kind of the film feel of it too, from the instrumental end, that it's a concept record, or like at least a narrative journey that goes on throughout the record. You can tell me where I'm right or wrong on that. Can you give the listeners an overview of the concept and the background for Dissenter? Because the way it's described from your kind of quotes that they pulled, it seems like it's much more on that concept level. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a story from start to finish. And the aerial view of that concept is exploring these man-made cycles that we have, whether it's political or economic or justice, whatever it is, and the corruption that lies within those. How it seems to be that, you know, we go from a path of peace and then we end up at war, right? I mean, we're at war right now. Like, it's pretty evident in our world that we have these systems that don't always work for us. And the story, it follows a protagonist who is in a dystopian world, and the world is ending, right? It's inevitable the world is going to end. But within that, there's a whole lot of power grabs, and, you know, you have an authoritarian government that is like, you know, comes in the name of peace, comes in the name of like, we're going to make everything as stable as possible. And with that, just destroys all dissent. And so you follow this person who is going through, we'll call him the dissenter, right? You know, atrocities happen at the beginning of the record, and in response to that, you know, he takes up arms and is like, let's go. Like, we're going to fight. Finds out that the rebellion isn't what he thought it would be, and that there's just as much, you know, compromise. There's just as much corruption within that realm too, and it's not doing it for him. You know, eventually he gets cast out of both facets, right? So doesn't belong because of his different thinking. Goes on a journey throughout the wilderness. The whole second half of the record is him processing what is the right thing. Like, how do you escape these cycles? And all while there is a massive natural cycle that's happening leading to the end of the world. And it all kind of comes to a head of like transcendence and oblivion, where it is the end of the world and you're facing this, you know, this inevitability. And what do you choose to think about? What do you choose to hang on to? And yeah, the record ends with the end of all things, basically. And then you have this swell of uncertainty at the very end where you're like, wait, did it end? Was that transcendence? Or is it all starting over again?
Yeah, I love that. You know, it definitely ends with sunshine and rainbows is what I would definitely say for the record, right? No, but I love that about it too. I love the kind of concept that you throw out there of these cycles, as you named off: political, economic, social, spiritual, whatever the case may be, in various movements. And what I like about the record too, with that concept in mind, is I always find it like a mark of great songwriting from a lyrical perspective when you can have like a full concept narrative record like this. And yet, if you listen to some individual songs, you make sure to make it to where
the message of those songs outside of that narrative still like make sense on their own, and like a, what literal is not the right word, but you get what I mean, more straightforward perspective outside of the narrative with the character you're discussing as well. One of the ones I wanted to get into is Liminal, that you released with Garrett Russell of Silent Planet. And what you had talked about with this one is that part of it that you said here, which is right up from what I know about Garrett as well when I've spoken to him, right up his alley as well, where you said some religious folks might talk about acceptance. They don't practice it at all. They discuss grace, but they don't live it in any way. Liminal shaped how we thought of the concept. You're stuck in the middle of two thoughts, but you're not necessarily on the right path, which kind of goes along with the narrative you're talking about as well that you just discussed.
Yeah.
I know with the band, I don't talk about band names often, but even the band name literally comes from a hymn. You guys have never, I appreciate how you guys have never shied away or tried to kind of muddle the waters on how faith influences your music and is very important at the centerpiece of your music. Well, this isn't necessarily a message you hear a whole lot spoken about openly. Maybe you do more in like the heavy scene that's influenced by faith, but certainly not in like the, unfortunately, at least the American, messaging that goes along with Christianity or faith at large, at least with the loudest voices anymore.
Right.
Just kind of speak to that aspect and that element that you hear, not just in this song, but I would say, Liminal, Nasher, and Heretic, those kind of three in a row, especially, and I'm sure a lot of others really dive deep into that from my perspective. So just kind of speak to the influence on that and what your perspective is there.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this album, through this story, it was a big processing moment for me personally, dealing with seeing the state of the American evangelical church and how I don't agree. I just absolutely don't agree with like most of what is being talked about, how it's being handled, the complete separation of the love of Jesus, and it will complete loss of perspective. And this is from my own point of view. It doesn't necessarily represent everybody in the band or whatever, but I think everybody in the band gets behind the lyrics and all of that. But even as far as like being a Christian band, like we're not all necessarily on the same exact spiritual path anymore. Right. But what we do agree on is that like there is an absolute bankruptcy of love in what we're experiencing right now, love and acceptance. And that has been really hard for me personally to deal with, especially being raised in Christianity, being raised to learn how to love my neighbor even when I don't agree with them. Learn how to see Christ in people of all walks of faith, of all lifestyles, and know their worth. And then when I have entered some of these churches that claim to be sprouted from the same movements, and I just see a whole lot of fake. And I see a whole lot of, it's hard to describe, I guess, but a whole lot of hypocrisy. And a complete missing the whole message of Jesus. Like, love your neighbor as yourself. Like that's the cornerstone of Christianity. And we forgot that the neighbor is the, Samaritan. Like that's the neighbor, right? Somebody that, the Jews just did not get along with at all. Like they hated each other. That's the neighbor, So anyway, processing all of this, there's like a lot of lyrics. I mean, there's a lot of angry stuff in there too. Like, cause I can't help but feel angry at that feeling of like, am I alone? Am I taking crazy pills? Is this what's happening here? And so it was a really good way for me to be able to process everything that I've experienced over the last few years. And it's allowed me to like hang on to my faith. And it's because I know that a lot of people are like, don't want to be associated with Christianity at all anymore. And I don't blame them. That's the thing. Right. It's like, I don't blame you. It's looking bad. It's looking pretty bad right now. And yeah, I just feel like part of my goal in these lyrics and this story, what I hope people get out of it is just a way to process these events and to a way to let out that cathartic energy, to healthily process anger and things that people might be feeling, as I was able to do in this record.
Yeah, no, as like I said, as someone who, grew up very much in those same veins, I'm not there myself anymore, but my thoughts have kind of changed on like how I perceive the problems. Like I don't perceive the faith as the problem. I perceive the movement as the
Right.
problem, right?
Yeah.
And as your like I always when I've tried to talk to people about how they're like getting disenfranchised about this or don't understand or you're grew up in the same way and just what they believe are at odds with when they enter an institution like a church or whatever is what you have to view it as that aspect of it as a social movement. It has really nothing to do with faith, right?
Yeah.
People trying to use the Bible to justify like mass slaughter because of end times and crazy stuff,
Right.
and you're hearing it from
Insane.
like literal government officials now just openly saying that's not that's the way to approach this is to go back to the foundation and show people that, like you said, love and acceptance isn't just like a slogan. It's like
Yeah.
part of your reality of how you should be perceiving the world if you are truly following the teachings of Jesus or the Bible or any faith-based anything, not just Christianity.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you bring that down. And like I said, to tie it in with the specific song Liminal, there's not a better other vocalist that you could feature for this song to talk about that exact same concept than Garrett Russell. So kind of, because from what I could tell, at least, because whenever people send these over ahead of time, I don't always have I don't have all the lyrics and like the features listed. Is Garrett the only feature on this record? That's correct, right? Am I
That's
right on that?
correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the idea with particularly adding him in here? Was it basically what you were just alluding to, or just kind of speak to why he's Silent Planet's the single feature for this concept record?
Yeah, I mean, I just love Garrett, man. He's just such a great guy. I mean, he's been like a friend for a while. And now he lives in Nashville, and so we get to go get lunch every once in a while. And I was producing a record for a band called Idle Threat here in Nashville. And they wanted to have Garrett come do a feature, and so he did, and it was like we just kind of reconnected during that time, and then he was like, "Hey, I've got these other 2 features that I need to do. Like, do you want? We'll throw you some cash, and will you track them?" And I was like, "Sure." So he came up to my house in Hendersonville, and I was like, while you're up here, I wrote this part that I think that your voice would sound sweet on. He was like, yeah, totally. So yeah, he tracked the part and we had a blast, and his voice sounds so cool. Like I'm a big fan of his and Silent Planet. So it was a privilege to have him on the record. And I think that you're right. It is like, I don't think we necessarily thought about it that way. Like, I think we are like-minded, him and I, but and that's what led to the collaboration, but also, yeah, it's just fun, really.
Yeah. Above all else, it was somebody that you're friends with that it helps that he lives in the same area you are. You just get to you get to actually have the feature in person when some of your bandmates can't be, and it just kind of works out that way, right? No, but yeah, I mean, perfect feature first and foremost for the actual performance, and second most because I think, as we talked about, everything that you're kind of bringing up in this record is very indicative of a lot of things that they've spoken about in their own music. And I know Garrett's very like intentional with his lyrics in that same vein on these sorts of topics. From there, a little bit with this record as well. You talked about the lyrical concept and starting at the very beginning here. Was there any other kind of, I guess, like I said, Liminal is probably, and those kind of 3 in there are probably my favorite ones, especially Heretic is, I love the kind of like, I don't want to call it new metal, but like thrashy type elements that are in there as well. Kind of like I always call it like new metal rapping, that kind of scream rapping you can do with a little bit of that attitude and bite to it. That's not something that, again, that's far and away from your guys' music, but there's definitely elements in here that you wouldn't have had 10 years ago because the elements that are within the scene weren't there at the time. So being a band that has influenced bands like Silent Planet, I'm sure if you ask Garrett or other people in that sort of era of that kind of newer metal or metalcore scene and movement, are there newer bands or newer artists that kind of like influence some of these different choices you guys took with the record? I know you talked about the film score and all that, but were there kind of younger bands that you ironically probably influenced that then influenced you to make some of the sounds and choices on this record?
To be honest, I don't listen to a lot of metalcore. And so
that's what a lot of people say.
Yeah. So, I mean, Knocked Loose is sick. And, we referenced them a couple times because the production is rad and it's just so heavy. And, there are a ton of talented bands that are out there doing really cool things. But I went back to Linkin Park. I went back to like some of the bands that I listened to when I was like younger to kind of spark that. I went back to Zayo. I went back to, early Norma Jean stuff. And that is kind of what like lit the fire, I guess, of like what got me into this music in the first place. Like, because it's not like I have been screaming a ton, and I don't write metalcore music often. So it's, it was one of those things where I kind of had to like, where do I even go for inspiration? I don't know. And I'm like, going to the new young bands, it's good. And I'm like, but it doesn't have that nostalgia for me. So I tend to go back to the old standbys, And so, yeah, it was kind of cool to like, Linkin Park was one of those bands that like I'd never really fully admitted how amazing I thought they were until like later on in life. And now I'm like, Chester was just like one of the best vocalists of all time, especially like when it comes to screaming, singing, any of that. So I like really look up to his vocal performances and I think, Heretic kind of that chorus and just the way I did my vocals in that, I was very heavily influenced by that, and Rage Against the Machine and stuff like that, like especially for that like second verse. Yeah.
Well, and you talk about the vocal performance of Linkin Park, but I think something that everyone's had to come to respect with how everyone has approached production in modern metal music is like, it's cliche at this point to say, I suppose, but like you wouldn't have the production choices people have done in modern metal over the past 15 years or more if it wasn't for the seemingly weird choices at the time that Linkin Park did with, not just the first two records, but a lot of the, there's like elements of what they've done that are still like reverberating stronger than anything else throughout like the finished product of what bands choose to release too, right?
Yeah.
Well, Steven, thanks so much for talking through this record. Again, May 1st, this comes out via Solid State Records. What's going on with the band leading up to the release? I know you guys have a few. I've got your website pulled up here just to make sure I don't miss anything. But I know you guys have a few shows lined up. We've got a few different things you're doing there. I know you're not a band that's touring full time, but just kind of plug what's going on for the band, how you're gonna kind of approach promoting the record and leading up to the release in May.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of cool things happening. So I don't know when you'll release this. I think there's a live Twitch right now, but there is another single dropping on Friday called Adrift that I'm really stoked on. If you were a fan of White as Snow on Attack of the Wolf King, then this is probably one for you. And the week after that, we're actually launching a Patreon to give people like a way, deeper insight into us making this record and a lot of like fun band conversations, old stories and cover songs and stuff like that. So that's one thing to look out for. And then right after the record drops, we play a bunch of shows. So we're playing Nashville and Southern California, Phoenix, Pacific Northwest, and also Quebec at a festival called Alloc. So very excited about all of that stuff. The best way to keep in contact with us, to hear about all this stuff, of course, go follow us on Instagram and all that stuff, but you're probably not going to see what we post anyway. So go to our website, hastetheday.com, sign up for our email list because that will go into your inbox, whether it's junk or whatever. Just look for that, sign up, look for our emails. And that is the best way to stay informed, especially as we're rolling out all these really cool things and announcing more shows as well. So
yeah, that's the best way to, to promote things, because I don't know if it feels this way for you as someone that's probably had to do the social media game for bands for so long, but like it really feels like you post things and it goes to, no matter how many followers you've gained from certain things you've done or whatever, it goes to like, no, if you look at the insights or you do anything like that, it's like why am I even putting this here? Like, just go to my
Yeah.
website, you know, like that's definitely
Exactly.
the way to go. I meant to
they're
bring
not
up
gonna,
that.
the meta's not
Yeah,
going to
sorry.
do us any favors.
No, shocking. I
Yeah.
meant to bring up the song Adrift earlier too. So
Yeah.
sorry I didn't do that before we kind of wrap things up here. I always love that about Haste the Day, that you've been able to, or especially I would say, you know, first and foremost with this track, add that sort of somber, what am I looking for? A melodic element in a way that feels a little different than when some other bands like post-hardcore or metalcore bands attempt to do a little ballad, right? Because
Yeah.
it feels very cohesive with the rest of the record, and it also still has like this urgency to it. Are you, as you're the person that primarily does screaming vocals, I know there's a little back and forth between you and Brennan, but is that an approach you really like to do, if you can really kind of let the melodic flag fly a little bit more on a song and kind of take that break? It just feels like it adds so much more impact to sort of the finale of the record.
Yeah, that's my kind of thing, you know, like I love that. Like I've always been a sucker for a ballad, and I love the songs that just envelop me with like melody and emotion and vibe, and to be able to sing. Like, again, I don't scream very often in my normal life, so singing
Right.
is a lot more natural for me, and a way that I can, it's so much easier for me to express emotion in that way, I think. So yeah, I love that track, and I love how it turned out. Yeah, every part of it. And I think you're right. Like, I think that it plays a really pivotal role in the album as a whole, because I mean, it's coming off the back of Heretic, right? Like it goes from Heretic to that.
It goes from Heretic, Escape, and then
Escape. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it has this natural progression of like coming down, and you take a breath and you're like, wait, what's happening here? And it gives you the ability to like take a breath and sit with what you've just experienced, at least in my mind. Well, you know, I can only do this for myself. We can only do this for ourselves, and hopefully other people see what we're doing. But yeah, so I'm really pumped on that song. I'm excited for people to hear it.
And from the sort of like film production, you know, narrative perspective, like that kind of somberness before the world ends is like something you need in there, because if you're going heavy the whole time, it doesn't quite have that impact for what hits with Teeth, and then especially Oblivion. So yeah, definitely adds, I think, like kind of to that third act, so to speak, if you want to talk about it from like a movie perspective. Yeah, really, I think sends it over the top for the kind of the finale of the record. So again, Stephen, Haste the Day, thanks so much for doing this. I will play a song at the end of this. I always do that for the show. This will be out next week, so Adrift will be out. Your other singles obviously included. So I always let the guest pick. So which one of the singles would you want to kind of promote the record if people haven't heard it before? Just kind of throw it out there. Which one of these would you want on at the end?
Man, can I? Let's see. Let's do Adrift. Screw it. We were just talking
the new
about
single.
It.
Yeah.
It's a little different from the rest of the record, but it is. It plays a good role.
Absolutely. All right, we'll play Adrift for the end of the Powerless podcast. Stephen, again, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.